And welcome back to Astro Self Care Sunday with yours truly, Kenya, where I come here each Sunday. I try each Sunday. I'm back into it. But I come here on Sundays when I come to talk to you about astrology and how you can use it to take care of yourself, how you can learn it and not just see it as fairy tale and mystical islands, but and not just, oh, my placement is this. I'm a moon Gemini and a Cancer rising and a Libra sun. I'm a, oh, and then my no. I mean, that's nice. But what are you doing with that? And other than, oh, I'm like this and I'm like that. That's nice. But what are you doing with that? How are you using it to take care of yourself? How are you using it to expand? How are you using it to gain your lessons? How are you using it to clear energies, karma? How are you using it to gift others? Right? So I come on here and talk about it. And so there's a whole Astral Self Care Sunday playlist. So if you're new here, first of all, push the subscribe button. Second of all, like the video. Third of all, catch up. Go to the playlist. There's lots of videos for you to browse to be able to get to know more about astrology, yourself, me, what I do, what I could do to support you if you are desiring it. So, last Sunday when I was here, I mentioned I wanted us to talk about the houses because the houses are such a critical part of astrology. And I think that definitely mainstream has no idea what we're talking about when we say, let's look at the houses. I have something on my glasses. They don't know what that means. What are we talking about? And even those who maybe this is, my rising, my this, may still get a little bit confused by what we mean by the houses. Well, as simple as I can put it, the houses are the different parts of your life. Okay. Astrology is not just looking at the personality and the characteristics of who you are, but it's also looking at what parts of your life did the soul come here to gain its lessons. And you'll notice that if you're looking at an actual chart, I need to start sharing my screen so that so I can be showing. That'd be the soon. But the idea is when you're looking at a chart and you see if you've pulled up your birth chart ever seen a birth chart, it was a circle and it looked like it had pie slices and then a bunch of symbols all in there, right? And some lines depending on what chart you're looking at. Well, I want you to pay attention to the pie slices or pizza slices because those are the houses and there are 12 houses. And if you look at my video from last week, I talk kind of in general what the houses are and why they're so important. So, what we're doing now is I was going to go first house for 1 week, the next week do a second house, but that was just going to take too long. That's 12 weeks. That's our whole summer. I don't want to spend our whole summer just on the houses. Okay. I want us to get into some juicy things, some things you could really use. All of it's really juicy, in my opinion. But what I've decided today is you see on the scroll and the title of this particular video is Identity, Assets, and Mindset. Astrology and the first three houses. Okay. Now, identity, assets, and mindset. Listen, y'all, I could literally do a whole week just talking about the first house because astrology is that extensive. Well, maybe not a whole week, but I could talk a while. But we're not doing that. We're not doing that. What I will say though is if we use it more concisely and just kind of think of one word to describe when I was thinking about it, I would say identity for the first house. Second house, I said assets, it also could be values. Okay, because both of those kind of. And the third house, I could say either communication or mindset. But I decided to say mindset, and I'll explain why. And I'll explain why I also said assets. Okay. So the first house, when you look at the first pie slice, okay, it's going to have a number 1. The first house always contains our rising sign. Okay. It's what starts the chart off. I mentioned this in the last video, so I won't repeat that over and over. But just again, it's really critical that you understand where, when we say the first house, that's it. Okay. It starts the chart off. And so naturally, the first house is ruled by Mars and the sign of Aries. Okay. Because Aries is the first sign, it also is equivalent to the first house. And the rulership of Aries is the planet of Mars. So, the way that you're going to think about, then what's that first house going to be about? Well, if it's ruled by Aries and it's ruled by Mars, we have to think about what are the energies of Aries and Mars? Identity, self, empowerment, um, self instincts, a sense of self, the body, independence, self assertion, drive, motivation, all those really empowering aspects that Mars energy brings and Aries energy brings. So when whatever is going on in your first house, it's always going to your rising sign is always in your first house, okay? The only way you're going to know exactly what your rising sign is if you calculate your birth chart knowing your exact, and I mean exact, not rounded up. This is why you want to be able to know your exact birth time, which typically is only going to really probably be found on a birth certificate. Mamas and daddies and cousins and everybody be like, oh, I think it was around 2 o'clock, girl. It was 2 o'clock when you might have been born at 2:59. And 2:59 is going to potentially have a different rising sign than 2 o'clock. Because remember, all the birth chart's doing is a screenshot of the position of where all the planets were and what position the Earth was in at the time you were born. A whole hour later, big planets, major planets, they're not going to change, right? Which is why you can still work with a person's chart per se without their birth time. But knowing the housing system, what house is what? No, you need the time. So anyway, that first house is where your rising sign is, and some of you are going to have other planets there. Okay. You may have your sun there. You may have your moon there. You may have Mars there. You may have Pluto there. You may have several planets there. You may have nothing but the ascending there. And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Okay. But the idea is this is all about the self. So, whatever sign is placed on your first house, even for instance, myself, I am a Cancer rising. So, my first house is Cancer. That is the only, oh, no, that's a lie. I have two placements in my first house. I have the rising, obviously, there. And then I also have my south node there. Okay. But before I go into that, because I have Cancer there, remember I said Aries and Mars rule the first house. So that's what naturally, again, is what that house is about, the qualities of Aries and Mars, which is self identity, self interest, needs, sense of self, body independence, those things. But because I have Cancer there, that means the way in which I exhibit my self identity, the way my drive is, what motivates me, how I assert myself is going to be more in how I project myself to others is going to be in a more Cancer way, more Cancer personality. Okay. So then we've got to think now. I've got to think about how Cancer, what are those traits about Cancer? And this is why it's important for you to first, and this is why in the playlist, if you go back, I go through all the signs first. And then I didn't get through all of the planets because they're maybe even more important. But definitely by knowing all the signs, that's how you're better able, to maneuver and understand things a little bit with more fluidity. If you only know your sun sign, it's going to be harder to understand the chart. So it's important. The chart is like math in the sense that you can't start doing division and multiplication until you've first done addition and subtraction. And before you can even do addition and subtraction, you got to know the numbers. You got to learn the numbers. And before you just learn the numbers, you have to know the order of the numbers. Astrology is very similar. Very, very, very similar. Okay. And that before I can jump over and just know all the richness of a house and the houses, I need to first really understand what are all the signs. And then there's subcategories to even understanding the energy of and the personality of each of the signs and the characteristics. Okay. So if we break it down though, and we use myself as an example again, Cancer being my rising, that means that's the nurturer, that's the mother, that's the water sign, that's the emotions. It's a cardinal, so it initiates real emotions. It's the one that wants to activate emotions. And so emotions and nurturing and mothering and taking care of and so forth is going to be a lot of my self identity, my self-interest, my how I exert my independence, how I motivate, what drives me to do is more with that Cancerian kind of way. Okay. Now, there can be some things so that's in general. I mentioned I have the South Node there. For me, that's what I have there. So, South Node is the things we've already mastered, the things that this lifetime is trying to teach us to let go of. Well, that's a very interesting placement. Because I just said self identity, body, independence, South Node, shed, let go of. I agree. Very confusing. But really, what it's asking me to do is to let go, because the South Node is about letting go the lower frequency things and those things that can be distorted and disempowering, and to hold and carry still the things that are empowering. So, one of the things about Cancer is one of its distorted or lower frequency energies, unhelpful, stagnant energies, is holding grudges, is emotional neediness, um, is self sacrifice type, nurture everybody but hurt self, like that. So those low frequency things, it's asking me to let go of when it comes to the self. Okay, so I can move more toward my North Node, which is always straight across from wherever your South Node is. So for me, that would be in Capricorn in the seventh house. We'll get to that later. Okay. But the first house, what you want to look at then again is what is the sign? What are the planets? And understand that that is a very personal house. And it's all about your identity, your sense of self, your body, and so forth. So if you are a Scorpio rising, think about Scorpio traits, because then that is how, those are the characteristics. That's the way you show up in terms of self identity. Now, depending on how do I want to say this? Depending on how other planets are talking to and communicating and interacting with those planets in that first house, it could be gifting or it could be challenging. Oppositions and squares are more of our challenges. Trines and sextiles are more of our gifting. Conjunctions, it depends. Okay, it depends. All right. I will say this, a little bit of a trick. If you have 3 or more planets sitting in that first house, in terms of self-care, pay attention to that. Because anytime we have 3 or more planets sitting in a particular house, that is where our soul is really wanting to do some work, really wanting to have expansion, really wanting to have lessons, really needing the planet's energies to help with the development. So it can tend, wherever we have 3 or more planets, those houses tend, or those parts of our life can tend to be the areas that may be more challenging, may have more hardship, may have more struggle, or what have you. But also, they, if you are doing the school of life and working on self and doing this self-care, they can give us the most blessings. Because at that point, we're honoring the soul's desire of expansion. So it's a really beautiful opportunity. So if you find that you have a lot going on in the first house, because the first house is so personal, it is the I, it is the I am, it is that Aries, it is our empowerment, it is our sense of self, that can feel hard. Okay. And then depending on the types of planets that are in that house, we can be even more challenging. Okay. But again, challenge doesn't equal bad in astrology. There's no such thing as that's bad. Hardship doesn't equal bad in astrology. Hardship, challenge, contrast in astrology is actually a huge part of what it's attempting to do and to gift us into our expansion. It's creating the contrast, it's creating the stress and the actual rub so that you will have full empowerment and abundance. So, those are the parts of your life where you have the possibility of amazement, where you have those four, three or more planets. Okay. All right. So, then the second house, I put assets, but I also said could be values, or we could say beliefs. They're all three. The second house is ruled by, what do you guess? What comes after Aries? Taurus. What rules Taurus? Venus. So Taurus and Venus rule the second house. So then the second house is that part of our life that deal with those Taurian and Venusian types of things. So our relationship with our resources, our assets. Second house is literally about our finances, but not just about how much or what you're going to get. How do you relate to your finances? How do you create your finances? How do you establish finances? What style, what way in which you have to move in order to have those finances? It's also about our values, though, and those assets that are not literal money, but those assets of who we are. Okay, the specialness of who we are and our beliefs. And so it's not maybe as personal per se as the first house was, but it is still very personal because it's our value to society and it's also how we're making a living and it's also those skills and those talents that we're growing and that we're needing to develop, okay? And so that we can really get to our potential. And like I mentioned, within, so that's like a inside personal value. Personal values are kind of our personal assets, right? It's also our sense of security and our sense of material. Okay. Our ways that we get our skills. So all those Taurian things, how we feel stable, how we feel secure, how we relate to the things that we need in our life, how resourceful we are, how we bring our skills into fruition, how we believe, how we value. Belief in another way, though, because we're going to get into another house later about the like actual like religious beliefs and spiritual beliefs. Like that's another house that's more relegated, but really how you believe about self. It's still a more personal house. Okay. And so for me, my second house, what comes after Cancer? Because for me, remember, Cancer was first. So what comes after Cancer? Leo. So the way in which I get my financial assets, the way in which I have these personal values, the way in which I have my skills and my talents are on a more Leo characteristics. Now, what is Leo? Leo is the creator, the expressor, the self-expressor, the ah the look at me kind of thing, right? The Leo is the creative, the playful, the charismatic, the light, the fixed. It's ruled by the sun. So the sun rules the second house. I'm sorry, for me, the sun is ruling the second. It's not ruling, but the sun is playing a lot for me. Okay. Because I have Leo there. Now, with that being said, putting that all together, what is Kenny? What's she doing right now? Talking to y'all. As a musician, when I was out there, what I have to do? Create. As an entrepreneur, what do I have to do? Create. So how I value myself, how I literally financially get my assets has to come from a more Leo type of energy. So creativity, inspiration, um, even performance to a certain degree, and a lot of light show and showing light is going to be critical for me to understand that if I'm not doing those things, how I will connect to my sense of skills and values and assets may be off. Now, I don't have any planets there. So I tend to tell people when you have a empty house or a house without planets, doesn't mean you're empty. It just means it's not a part of your life where a lot of the bigger lessons are necessarily going to be held, or where a lot of it's probably a fairly balanced space. It's not needing all of the other planet energies to fulfill its duty. It's still relevant. It's still going to have its thing. Obviously, planets are still transiting through that area, so there's still development, but it's not going to be one of those areas probably where I feel as much of the contrast. Okay. All right. And then the third house, okay, the third part of our life, and this one is a little bit deeper. Well, they're all deep, but I think this is deeper because I know this is more influenced when we look at generational patterns, we look at ancestral. That's also first house too, but definitely the third house. The third house is I put mindset, okay, but it's also communication, and it's about family communication. Those closest to us, those closest within our community, our siblings. Okay. So it's also, that's why I put mindset, because it's also generational. It has a very strong ancestral influence to it. And so it's where we also hold a lot of our karma around how we're thinking. So again, think about this. Think about, let's reflect to our families. And think about, oh, grandma or Auntie Betty, like they always just think like this. They're not gonna let us do this, they go this. And so then we get triggered by that, and we can feel like ourselves like, oh, and then when we get older and we have our kids, we're like, I just sounded like my mama. I just said that just like my Auntie Betty and my grandma, my what that communication, the way it was wired and passed down to you. How are you gonna shift it? And so our third house, I really look at the third house very carefully to better understand, what are some limitations when when I have a client who I can tell has some limited beliefs, limited narratives in their mind. Here's this story that's not necessarily serving them in this space. A lot of times I'm going to want to look at the third house, because the third house is going to tell me karmically, it's going to tell me one, just how they go about, whatever sign is there, how they communicate, how communication really, their style of communication when it comes to family, when it comes particularly siblings and extended kind of cousins, that part of family. The mom and daddy stuff is going to come up in the fourth house, which we'll do next week or the next time I hop on. I don't know if it'll be next week, but the next time I do the video, I'll do that. But this is more again with siblings and family that is like within, it's like our immediate environment. Okay. And so because it's related to our immediate environment, and there's so much that happens with childhood that influences how we behave in our adulthood. That's why I say, this becomes kind of a more generational thing, because as children, when we're coming into our environments, we're taking on and getting conditioned, not of choice, by whatever the environment is giving us. Okay. And it shapes and it molds our kind of mental approach of how we do our everyday lives. Okay. And that can be very karmic. That can be something that you didn't necessarily just come up with, but this was how you were raised, right? This is how I was raised. And either we're going to continue that. A lot of times we continue that trajectory unconsciously or subconsciously, not really realizing, oh, I'm doing the very thing. Okay. So it can be a little bit of a more challenging, because a lot of it honestly can be extremely subconscious, and we're not even aware that that's how our mindset and how our mental approach is with things. And again, when I say limited thoughts, limited beliefs, I got to look at the third house, because again, this is what you had to do to exist and to feel loved and to survive and to what have you in your family. So astrology is suggesting, okay, well, yeah, that's what that was. So what do we need to do in this lifetime for you to make some expansion on that, to develop that, to move through that, to move through that mindset. Okay. Um, and it also tells so much about how you relate with siblings and with relatives and potentially even friends. Okay. So I, for instance, I have Virgo in my third house. And it's another house that I don't have any planets. Okay. So it's funny because I know that I can feel my Virgoism in me. Like I feel it sometimes. And I'd be like, wow, where's that? I'm not a Virgo though. Virgo's not my top three. But because Virgo is mindset for me, okay. And remember, third house is ruled actually naturally by Gemini, and both Gemini and Virgo share Mercury as their ruler. So I'm still got that Mercury thing and Virgo thing in how I am naturally there. So it's kind of interesting to because I don't I wonder sometimes why am I so detailed with like my emails and communicating and this, but I'm a Scorpio and I'm can't what and I'm a Sag Mercury, but I also have some Virgo Mercury going on there because of that third house. So you want to look at your third house again. I think it's a really, again, if you've got three or more planets there, that's an area where the soul's really wanting to do some shifts, some changes, and probably some significant generational shifts, because again that house is so tied to family, to mindset, approach, and typically in that childhood that's being passed on to us from family. So there we go with the generational kind of patterning of it all. Okay. So three or more, or if you have those planets that are heavier hitters like your Pluto or your Saturn, um, you know, that's or even the moon because it's so personal with the needs, but definitely, it may be a little bit more challenging because when you have Pluto there, we're dealing with generational patterns of power, intensity, and things that want transformation, and you are being called to karmically really be the transformer on that on a subconscious level. That can be some pretty deep work, right? So, so yeah. So those are our first three houses. All right, I did it in less than 30 minutes. Awesome. First house, identity, self, self-interest, self-needs, body, independence, all those Aries, Mars things. Second house, assets, our financial way we make money, our values, our beliefs, our skills, how we become resourceful, ruled by Taurus and Venus. Third house, ruled by Gemini and Mercury, our mindset, our communication, our thinking, our thoughts, our mental approaches to things, particularly as it relates to siblings, family, extended family, community, close peers, friends. Okay. So hopefully, so when you consider some self-care, just take a moment, look. I don't want to bombard you. Take a moment, just look at what's in those houses, what signs and what planets. I would say, see if those of you who are a little bit more advanced, see what is trining, what is sextiling, because that's showing some gifts in those areas, but also look at what's squaring and opposing, because that's where the rub is. And again, if you have three or more planets in either one of or all of or whatever of those houses, that's where the soul is really going to be working on you to get some beautiful development, which means some life and stuff, so that you'll have expansion. Okay. All right. If this was helpful, if you loved it, please share this video. You already are subscribed, right? Listen, guys, we are only 24. Last time I checked, only 24 people away from me hitting 1,000. That's huge. I got to have a party when we hit 1,000. Help me hit 1,000. Share this, like this, and obviously subscribe if you're not already subscribed. All right. I hope to come back next weekend. Next Sunday is my son's graduation. This week's going to be a lot. I don't know if I'm going to be able to squeeze another video out this week. I don't know. We'll see. But whenever I do the next video, it will be fourth, fifth, and sixth houses. And I'll give those titles later. All right. All right. You guys make sure you're taking good care of yourself. Don't just know your planets and placements, know why and know how you can serve yourself and how the soul is coming here, what it's wanting to do while here. All right. You guys take care. Bye.